the five biggest wars in politics right now, as I said, I often think about covering the news in terms of battles, big characters, big themes, big conflicts that define the moment and sometimes define the long term. And for the Democratic Party, my number 5 battle is Rahm Emanuel versus the left. The Democratic Party is looking to see how this is going to shake out. The party's moved farther to the left than it has in years, maybe ever. And for people who remember Bill Clinton in 1992, and Rahm Emanuel does, that's where I met him. He was a fundraiser on the Clinton campaign in 1992, had remarkable success. Back then, raising a couple $1 million was considered big success. Rahm Emanuel was part of the effort that Bill Clinton made to simultaneously reassure the base of the party, but also move the party to the center with a premium put on the latter. Right now, Rahm Emanuel is clearly out there thinking of running for president, did a bunch of interviews recently, including one with Megyn Kelly. And in that interview, Megyn, not surprisingly, pressed him on issues related to trans rights, particularly as it pertains to children. Now, Rahm knows the Clinton model well. You can't just insult the base. You have to realize that if you're going to be the Democratic nominee for president, you've got to deal with the feelings and thoughts of the base. But you also, at this point, if you want to prove electability, if you want to be electable, you've got to demonstrate the capacity to stand up to the base when you think they're wrong. Generally, it works if it's authentic. Bill Clinton believed in welfare reform. He believed in the death penalty. They weren't positions he made up to try to prove to moderate voters that he was more centrist. That's the key. So Rahm Emanuel is out there now, and he knows these questions are coming, and he's trying to, in a I'd say, a somewhat self-conscious way, execute the Clinton policy. Again, agree with the base when you agree with them, but when you disagree with them, stand up. Here is Rahm Emanuel in his battle versus the left, talking to Megyn Kelly about trans rights.
So do you believe boys should be able to play in girls' sports?
No.
Do you believe that...
Is this the round robin?
Yeah, we'll do a quick rapid fire, and then we can move past this.
Okay.
Do you believe that kids under the age of 18 should be able to be put on puberty blockers and then cross-sex hormones?
I think parents have to make that decision themselves. I think that a child is too young at 18 to make that decision. It has to be made with a family and that choice. I think before somebody makes a life decision, they have to think twice about that.
So you disagree then with the Tim Walz policy in Minnesota, where a child who doesn't get affirmed by his parents can go into Minnesota and get jurisdiction there and get the parental decision overruled? Yeah,
look, I think these are life decisions, and I'm also slightly both. I have two minds, not two minds, but two strains that influence an opinion. One, this is a life decision, and a child can't make that decision. You have to have some moral development and character and judgment and foundation for that. Two, parents have to be involved in that, and I think that's for them to make. I don't think the public should be in that space.
What if, there are some parents out there who are completely whacked in the head. There really are. They're not.
Well, that's not news, is it?
But it's not just
no.
No, it's not news. But to me, it's terrifying because
I left this out, but I want to repeat it. Is I have a son and 2 daughters, and they are physically different, and that's why when it comes to sports.
Why did all the Democrats bail off of that point? A couple came out right after the election and they said what you just said, and then they got browbeaten, and then they started to walk back.
The answers in the question. That's not ever scared me. And, I used to say this to President Clinton and President Obama. Sound is not always fury. Sometimes it's just sound. And don't assume just because somebody's screaming at you, they represent more than their own voice.
Should we be putting men in female prisons? Men claiming they're women?
No.
And, all right, here's my last one for you. Can a man become a woman?
Can a man become a woman? No.
Thank you.
No.
That's so easy. Why don't more people in your party just say that?
Because I'm now going to go into a witness protection plan.
All right, again, guy was mayor of Chicago. He was a White House chief of staff, ambassador to Japan. He's got a ton of experience, congressman from Chicago. But that little joke at the end, I'm going to go in the witness protection program. Bill Clinton would never have said that, at least I don't think. This is serious stuff to stand up to the wing of the party. He gave answers there that a lot of Democrats would be afraid of giving. He was pretty tentative, right? You heard him hesitate, repeat the question, think about it. But in the end, he said the positions that are more popular with the country, less popular with the base of the party. And he knows he could pay a price for it. And it's his biggest vulnerability, I think, if he does run for president. We'll see, but that battle remains to be seen. But I'll tell you this, Rahm Emanuel is the only one right now waging it in a serious way. He's the only Democrat thinking of running for president who's going into the lion's den and answering those questions consistently in a way that at least is beginning the process of trying to demonstrate to voters that he will stand up to the base of the party when he disagrees. That's a big conflict. Whether it's Rahm Emanuel or someone else, the winner of the Democratic nomination, his history suggests, will be the person who best execute that strategy. All right, the number 4 conflict right now, Trump versus the Wall Street Journal. The Journal, of course, a few days ago, writing a story alleging that Donald Trump wrote a letter for Jeffrey Epstein's bawdy 50th birthday book. The president denies it. And this is a battle that's so interesting because, of course, the Wall Street Journal is owned by Rupert Murdoch. Donald Trump and Rupert Murdoch have a long and complicated relationship. And if you look at the last 10 years, more often than not, Murdoch has not wanted Donald Trump to be the Republican nominee. He has seen in Trump someone who does not support his positions on issues like immigration. And yet Murdoch and his properties are often supportive of Trump. Not the Journal, though. The editorial page has been very tough on Donald Trump consistently. And the news section has done very aggressive reporting, as it always does, and particularly now under Emma Tucker, who is their editor. They're tough on Trump. And he doesn't like it. And he did not like this story. There's a drama that's been reported on a little bit behind the scenes that Donald Trump says he called Rupert Murdoch to try to stop the story from running, that he talked to the editor, that his press secretary talked to the editor and said, this story is false and shouldn't run. And then, of course, 1-2 punch. First, Trump sues the Journal and Murdoch and the reporters for the story, the kind of suit he brought before he was president, between his 2 terms, but now bringing it as president. And then just the other day, the Wall Street Journal was supposed to be in the press pool for the president's upcoming trip to Scotland. They were booted out. Now, the White House, of course, has booted other news organizations out of the pool. And in the case of the Wall Street Journal or the Associated Press, they basically made it a permanent thing. This is, as far as we know, just one time. But this battle is worth watching, not only because it says about what it says about Trump's relationship with Murdoch and with one of the most powerful newspapers in the country, but also about how the president, as president, will deal with the press. And then, of course, it'll tell us something about the Epstein battle. I don't think this case will ever go to trial. I don't think either side would like the discovery, particularly maybe the president, that would take place before any trial took place. But it is going to be part of the narrative of Donald Trump versus the Wall Street Journal. And as I said, the Wall Street Journal is somewhat of a stand-in for Rupert Murdoch. So keep watching that one. All right. Number 3, James Carville versus Mr. Mandani. The mayoral candidate in New York City has freaked out many Democrats, worried that the president of the United States and other Republicans will make Mandani the face of the Democratic Party. Carville went to a familiar place for him, the pages of the New York Times, the editorial page there, and wrote an op-ed piece basically saying that Democrats need to define themselves in a different way than by Mandani. And it's interesting, Carville hasn't won a presidential race in 33 years, going back to 1992. But he is still looked at by many Democrats as one of their best and strongest strategists. And there's no doubt, whether it's writing in the New York Times or it's on his podcast or TV appearances, there's no doubt that Carville will go there. He'll say things that others won't. There's lots of Democrats who believe, as Carville does, that they cannot let Mandani define the Democratic Party. Carville's willing to say it in public. Now, Mandani, for his part, is interesting. He is not hitting back himself very hard at people who criticize him. He tends to joke about it. He made a funny video about an upcoming trip to Africa, to Uganda, where he made light of the fact that many of his critics have told him he should go back to Africa permanently. This is just a short-term visit. But this fight between Carville and Mandani is interesting because the business community in New York, many moderate Democrats continue to strategize somewhat privately about how to stop him, about how to keep him from winning the general election. Those private strategies are taking place in New York, in the Hamptons, where a lot of these rich people are. They're trying to figure out how can they keep him from being mayor. There's all sorts of talk about whether there'll be super PACs or other efforts in the fall, in the home stretch of this race, to stop him. Carville, though, is out front, kind of the tip of the spear, saying publicly in this op-ed piece what many Democrats, as I said, are saying privately, the guy needs to be stopped. It's another battle worth watching. All right, number two, Scott Bessent versus the Fed. Scott Bessent is the president's Treasury Secretary, of course. The Treasury position is one that he's excelled in. He's uniformly given high marks for the job he's done in that position. First time in a government job like this. And Bessent has thrived. Many times people come into the Treasury slot from the business world where Bessent worked, from the private sector, and they don't do well because it's a steep learning curve. People in private sector sometimes take an adjustment, and sometimes they don't make the adjustment at all to dealing with government. Bessent has excelled on television. He's excelled in negotiations. He's excelled in the inside game of getting power in the government with the president, with the White House chief of staff, maybe the most powerful member of the cabinet. And now he's turned his attention to the Fed in two ways. First, he's in charge of figuring out who to recommend to the president to replace the Fed chairman when either the Fed chairman is forced out from the job. Jay Powell is clearly trying to hold on to the position. The president toggles back and forth in public between saying he should go and he might fire him and saying, well, he can't fire him. And Bessent has given that advice to the president, as have others, to say it would be economically and legally problematic to try to remove the chair when, if he wants to hold on, he probably can. So one thing Bessent's doing is focused on giving the president advice about who to choose. Another thing he's been focused on is whether he wants the job himself. Many people now say that if the president decides Bessent would be the right person to go to the Fed, that's who he wants there. High stakes game. If the president's agenda basically, to a large extent domestically, finished up when he passed the reconciliation bill, the so-called big beautiful bill, maybe Scott Bessent would find the Fed job more challenging. No one in the modern era has held both the Treasury and Fed jobs and excelled. And so Bessent might find that an interesting challenge. So he's in charge of this, advising the president about what to do about Jay Powell. He's in charge of the search committee to figure out who should replace Jay Powell when his term ends. He's also been considered now as someone who might take the job. And he's now, this week, adopted a fourth position or role related to the Fed, and that is of Fed critic. He sounds like Rand Paul or Ron Paul now in his critique of an organization that within a few months he may be in charge of. Here is Scott Bessent going super tough versus the Fed.
I mean, look at as you said at the top of this broadcast, there was fear mongering over tariffs, and thus far we have seen very little, if any, inflation. We've had great inflation numbers. So, I think this idea of them not being able to break out of a certain mindset, all these PhDs over there, I don't know what they do. This is like universal basic income for academic economists.
Mr. Secretary,
Whoa.
we had a
That's pretty tough stuff. Kind of mocking the Fed and sounding very much like an outsider. And it's interesting because although he's not worked at the Fed, Scott Bessent is a longtime player at the highest levels of high finance. He's totally comfortable dealing with that world. He knows a lot of people in that world. But there he was sounding very populist, very much outsider. And I think whoever goes to the Fed, President Trump is looking for someone to approach it as an outsider who will shake things up, who will not greenlight a $2 billion reconstruction project, which is currently going on around the Fed headquarters, who will not be business as usual, and who will do what Donald Trump wants, which is lower interest rates. So whether Bessent wants the job or not, that might have been a tell, that kind of critique of the Fed, very outsidery, anti-establishment critique. But there's no doubt that he's laying the groundwork, whether it's him or not, to have someone go over to the Fed whenever Powell leaves, whether it's before his term expires or not, to be a change agent at the Fed. And that's an important and interesting role because the president's disappointed. When people say if it's not Bessent, it might be someone who's currently on the Fed, based on my reporting, I have my doubts. The president wants an outsider over there to do what he wants done, not someone who will be business as usual. So that conflict, Bessent versus the Fed, number 2 on my list. The number 1 conflict of the week is Hunter Biden versus everybody. Extraordinary 3-hour podcast interview Hunter Biden did, and he spared no one. I heard from so many people after this interview aired, people who don't particularly like Hunter Biden, don't particularly like that he's on the stage if they're a Democrat, who loved the machete that he swung and hit some of the leading lights of the Democratic Party and at least one journalist. Here is Hunter Biden versus everybody and Unbound.
Opinions, but fuck him. Fuck him. Fuck him and everybody around him. I don't have to be fucking nice. Number one, I agree with Quentin Tarantino. Fucking George Clooney is not a fucking actor. He is a fucking, I don't know what he is. He's a brand. And by the way, and God bless him. You know what? He supposedly treats his friends really well. You know what I mean? Buys them things. And he's got a really great place in Lake Como. And he's great friends with Barack Obama. Fuck you. What do you have to do with fucking anything? Why do I have to fucking listen to you? What right do you have to step on a man who's given 52 years of his fucking life to the service of this country and decide that you, George Clooney, are going to take out basically a full-page ad in the fucking New York Times to me and James Carville, who hasn't run a race in 40 fucking years, and David Axelrod, who had one success in his political life, and that was Barack Obama. And that was because of Barack Obama, not because of fucking David Axelrod. And David Plouffe, and all of these guys, and the Pod Save America guys, who were junior fucking speechwriters in, on Barack Obama's Senate staff, who have been dining out on the relationship with him for years, making millions of dollars. The Anita Dunns of the world, who's made $40-50 million off the Democratic Party. They're all going to insert their judgment over a man who has figured out, unlike anybody else, how to get elected to the United States Senate over 7 times, how to pass more legislation than any president in history, how to have a better midterm election than anybody in history, and how to garner more votes than any president that has ever run. And they're going to replace their judgment for his. Not to mention Who's Jake Tapper's audience? Jake Tapper?
My mom or something? I don't know.
Well, I don't know. For
Yeah.
real, though. I don't even think it's your mom anymore.
No.
By the numbers, what influence does Jake Tapper have over anything? He has the smallest audience on cable news. And beyond that, I think that the book is right now on Amazon that he put out. I mean, his ratings just went to shit after he put the book out. You know, they did a 2-week infomercial for it. I mean, it was such a money grab, such a disservice to everybody that he serves with.
I have so many thoughts about Hunter Biden versus everybody. It's why I made it the number one conflict. First of all, like I said, he swung the machete wide there, and he hit a lot of people who aren't necessarily maybe as popular as they think they are within the Democratic Party. Second, everything he said there, or nearly everything, reflects the point of view of his dad, who he loves, including the use of profanity, which Joe Biden uses in abundance in private. Hunter's taken it public here. But some people don't love Hunter Biden versus everybody in the Democratic Party. Even if they might agree with some of what he said, they do not want to take the spotlight away from other Democratic leaders of the future rather than of the past. They do not want the party's focus to be fighting each other. They want the focus to be on critiquing Donald Trump. And I got to ask the question, what is Hunter Biden's goal here? Because some of what he says is true, maybe. But his overall critique in this 3-hour interview that his dad would have won re-election had he not been forced off the ticket, there's just no data to back it up. And that bottom line, that question of Democrats being honest about his father, both in terms of his electoral possibilities and also, as we've discussed here before, the degree of his cognitive decline, all of that is stuff that when Hunter Biden's in the conversation, the Democrats aren't having an honest conversation about it. So I'll be curious to see what happens to Hunter Biden versus everybody. Most of everybody, not everybody, but most of them turn the other cheek. We'll see if that conflict is a 2-day wonder or whether Hunter or the people in everybody keep it going.